In the Linux community, we could be accused of many different things, but unfortunately, being a priority isn't often one. Now, when it comes to desktops and laptops, the situation is a lot better than it used to be because we have companies like System76 and Tuxedo Computers that are dedicated to providing Linux on the desktop. In addition to that, we also have various ThinkPad models that ship with Linux. Dell has a few as well. So we definitely have a lot of options when it comes to PCs, but when you start to get into the territory of mobile computing, that's when things unfortunately fall over. But that might be about to change, because right here in the studio, I have the JingPad A1 tablet from Jingling, which is aiming to be a consumer-level tablet, which is a bold claim, a consumer-level tablet that runs Linux. And the JingPad tablet has seemingly come out of nowhere, literally. Earlier this year, I reviewed the RaspPad, which was a really cool device that could turn your Raspberry Pi into a Linux-powered tablet, but the chassis was really thick, and it's definitely not something that you would put head-to-head against an iPad. And shortly after that video came out, I had another tablet in the studio, the pre-release version of the JingPad. I reviewed the beta of that product back in August, and I came away very excited because even though it was unfinished, it was still closer to a consumer-level experience than any other device I've ever used when it comes to a Linux-powered tablet. I was very impressed with the JingPad when I took a look at it back then, and I found that the build quality was especially impressive. And in the studio today, I have the final version of the JingPad A1 tablet, and I can't wait to give you guys my thoughts. Now the thing is, the manufacturer claims that this is the world's first Linux-powered tablet that's consumer-ready, and that's a really bold claim, but since they've made that claim, that's what I'm going to hold them to. Now before we get into the actual review, there's a quick disclaimer that I need to get out of the way first. Jingling sent this tablet over to the LearnLinuxTV studios for review, but just like everybody else, I don't allow them to screen review videos before you guys get to see it. So they're watching it for the first time the same day that you guys are watching it for the first time. And as always, I'm going to give you guys my unbiased opinion about this tablet, and I'll let you guys know exactly what I think, because the policy here at LearnLinuxTV is if a company sends me a product for review, they do so at their own risk. So without any further ado, let's answer the question if the JingPad A1 is truly the world's first consumer-ready Linux tablet. So first of all, what the heck is a JingPad? Well, the JingPad is a tablet, like I mentioned, that aims to be the world's first consumer-level ARM-based Linux tablet. According to their website, anyway. My preview video for the beta version of the product was uploaded back in August, and in that video, I concluded that it was a very impressive device, especially considering that it wasn't even finished yet. So first of all, let's take a look at the unboxing. Jingling sent over both the JingPad A1 tablet as well as their keyboard case accessory, so I actually had two things to unbox. For the JingPad, the packaging is a bit minimalist. It just doesn't call too much attention to itself. Now, that doesn't mean that the packaging isn't good. It's definitely professional, there's no question about that. After you remove the shrink wrap, your standard components are inside the box. You'll get a USB cable, a power brick, and of course, the tablet itself. It also came with what looks like an ejection tool for a SIM card, but I didn't have a chance to test cellular connectivity during this review. The JingPad also comes with a matching case inside the box, which is the case you'll use if you don't order the keyboard case, which is sold separately. There's also a pencil included in the box as well, which acts as a stylus. Now when it comes to the keyboard case, I would say the packaging was also somewhat minimalist as well. Other than the case itself, there really wasn't all that much inside. And when you connect the tablet to the case, it actually has a very firm grip, so it's definitely not going to fall off. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the metric that I'll be using today for this review is whether or not the JingPad is truly consumer ready. So in regards to packaging, is it a consumer ready packaging? Does it give you the retail experience that you might get from a name brand tablet? I would say yes, it does. Now, of course, the packaging isn't on the same level as, well, Apple or something like that, but considering that Amazon's Kindle tablets are sold in a package that's basically newspaper, then it's really hard for Jingling to fail in this category. But overall, I do think the packaging was pretty well put together, so I can't complain. So now let's move on to build quality. And this is where I think the JingPad A1 really shines. The build quality is absolutely consumer level. It's literally the exact same build quality as I would expect from a tablet purchased from a retail store. There's no flex in the chassis at all, it's very solid. The A1 features an 11-inch AMOLED multi-touch display with a resolution of 2368 by 1728, and the brightness of the display is measured at 350 nits. The bezel is also very reasonable with a screen-to-body ratio at around 90%. It looks really good. And sure, I would prefer no bezel at all, but honestly, it's fine. I have no complaints about the bezel size at all whatsoever. Now, combined with the keyboard case, it's even better. The JingPad keyboard features a touchpad, and the keys have some decent key travel even though the case itself is a bit on the thin side. Like I mentioned before, the keyboard case grips the tablet with some serious cling, so the tablet will not fall off the case anytime soon. Also, there's an included prop on the case as well that'll keep it from tipping over. So when it comes to hardware quality, I would say yes, the JingPad A1 is definitely consumer level. And the build quality is actually what has me the most perplexed. I mean, how can this even exist? Previous Linux tablets, although decent, weren't anywhere near as good as this, and from what I understand, this is Jingling's first attempt at a tablet. So how did they create something so good the first time around that's so much better than anything that's come before it? Is there a time traveler that brought a Linux tablet from 5 years from now into the present? I mean, that would be cool, although impossible, but it does kind of seem like it. I mean, we Linux users haven't really had the best of luck when it comes to mobile computing. At one point, Ubuntu Touch had a lot of promise, only to end up getting discontinued. The PinePhone and the PineTap are great devices, but they're mostly considered to be for developers, early adopters, and enthusiasts. When I reviewed the RaspPad, I really liked it, but one downside was that it was very thick. And now we have the JingPad. It shouldn't exist, but here it is. In my opinion, the build quality has eclipsed all other Linux tablets that I've used. How the heck did they do this? It usually takes years and several model refreshes to get to this point, but here we are. But even as good as the hardware isn't everything when it comes to a tablet. A good tablet needs a good operating system as well. The JingPad A1 is powered by JingOS, a custom Linux distribution that uses Ubuntu 20.04 as its base. JingOS itself is what's known as a convergent OS, meaning that its interface changes to adapt to the platform that it's being run on. Traditionally, a convergent distribution means that if you install it on a PC, you'll end up getting a user interface that utilizes desktop paradigms. If you install a convergent distribution on a tablet, then it's going to have a more tablet-like interface. Basically, a convergent distribution changes depending on the device that it's being installed on. And JingOS is actually a convergent distribution. Now, I didn't have a chance to test it on a PC to see what the desktop side of things looks like. For this review, I'm focused on the tablet itself, not as much the operating system. But even though JingOS is a convergent distribution, its primary focus is still on the tablet. And I mentioned that I didn't have a chance to try out JingOS on a PC, so yes, you can actually download JingOS and install it on a PC. Now, I didn't have a chance to test that out before record time, but I wanted to mention that because JingOS is not actually specific to the JingPad. It exists of and by itself, but it definitely fits in very well on the JingPad. And you know what? JingOS is actually pretty good. It's easy to use, and it stays out of your way when you're running apps. The interface is very similar to iPadOS in my opinion. Not to the point where I think it's a downright ripoff, but it does give me the impression that iPadOS might have been an inspiration for its design. On the home screen, you'll have an icon for each app that you have installed. Tapping an application icon with your finger or with a pencil will launch it, and all apps launch full screen. Other than the top bar, which shows the time, Wi-Fi status, and battery level, the entire operating system is hidden when an app is running. To switch between running apps, you could pull up from the bottom just slightly, and then slide your finger to the left or to the right to cycle between apps that you have open. If you want to go back to the desktop, maybe you want to launch another app, then all you have to do is swipe your finger from the bottom edge of the screen all the way up to the top and the desktop will appear. While you're there at the desktop, you can swipe up from the bottom part of the screen about a few inches, and a screen will appear that shows each app that you have open lined up almost like a grid. Here you can swipe an app off the screen to close it, or just tap on an application to switch to it. On the bottom of the interface, there's a panel there with 3 icons by default: a terminal, the store, and settings, respectively. You can add a new app to the panel by simply dragging its icon into it, which is pretty similar to iPadOS. In fact, even the multitasking motions are similar to iPadOS as well, so if you have experience using an iPad, then I think you'll adapt to this operating system quite quickly. As far as performance is concerned, JingOS is quite responsive. I don't remember it slowing down a single time during my tests. Since this tablet features an 8-core CPU and 8 GB of RAM, that makes sense. Apps open reasonably fast, the OS is responsive, and switching between applications is very smooth. You can't really ask for more than that. Now let's talk about the integrated camera. The JingPad A1 features a 16-megapixel rear camera, and it has an 8-megapixel camera on the front. The cameras are accessed by the built-in camera app, which gives you an easy-to-use interface to take pictures and record video. Now, I'm not a photography or a camera expert. The only research that I've done on cameras was for this channel. But the photos taken with the JingPad look, well, pretty good to me. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm satisfied with the quality of the camera. Now, to be fair, I don't really think a tablet is going to become a primary camera for anyone. I think on tablets taking pictures is more of an aside than a core feature. But the pictures look really good and the camera app is very easy to use, so no complaints there. Now when it comes to the audio quality, the built-in speakers are actually pretty good. In fact, the audio level on the JingPad at full volume was actually higher than a Tuxedo notebook that I had sitting right next to it. And even when I cranked up some music, nothing became distorted. I could hear each individual instrument very clearly, and overall, it sounds good to me. So, at this point in the review, if you were to ask me whether or not I thought the JingPad A1 actually was a consumer-ready Linux tablet, I would say, well, yeah. The build quality is really good, the screen is very beautiful. I just love everything about it. Even the operating system is easy to use. It has all the features that you would expect in a tablet. But when we start to look at application availability, that's when my opinion started to become a little mixed. First, let's take a look at the Store app, which is where you'll go to install new apps. After launching the Store app, you can take a look through the various categories, and when you find an app you like, you simply click on the Get icon, and once the app is installed, an icon for it will appear right on the desktop. So the process of installing apps is quite easy. However, the JingPad is a relatively new platform, so it's not going to have a massive app library that can contend with the likes of Android or iOS at this point. But it does appear as though the application library has grown since the last time I checked out the JingPad, so I could definitely see some progress. Between the apps that are pre-installed or can easily be installed through the store, we have developer tools such as a terminal and Visual Studio Code. For general productivity, we have WPS Office, Thunderbird, Chromium, and more. Even though we have some great apps in the store, the JingPad doesn't really have a huge library of apps, so that is a bit of a downside. Now, like I mentioned, it is growing, and it's still early days for this platform. However, even though we don't have a massive library in the Store app, that doesn't mean that we don't have access to more apps other than those. JingOS is based on Ubuntu after all, so you can install standard Ubuntu apps as well. For example, I was able to install LibreOffice Writer via the package manager from a terminal. Now, LibreOffice isn't mentioned at all in the store, which I think is kind of a shame, but there's nothing stopping you from installing it. And even though I bypassed the Store app to install LibreOffice Writer, JingOS still showed an icon for it on the desktop. And LibreOffice itself works very well on the JingPad, so I guess I don't understand why it's not featured in the store. Then again, it is a monumental task to try and test every single app that's available for Linux, so I'm sure with time it's going to grow. The initial app selection in the store does have some really good apps, but eventually I would like to see it be more populated than it is as of the time I'm recording this video. It has a majority of the things you'd need, but there's still room for improvement. Another feature of JingOS that's worth talking about is its ability to run Android apps. Now, at the time I'm recording this review though, Android app support isn't fully realized just yet. Currently, it's more or less a proof of concept. There's some Android apps that you can install that are provided as Debian packages, but the wider library of Android apps are missing. My understanding is that Android app support is an important goal for the project, so I'm hopeful that they'll leverage this more in the future. And the thing is, Android app support could potentially be a game changer here. Reason being, most new mobile platforms fail to compete, and the reason for this is kind of a catch-22. Developers won't create apps for a platform that doesn't have that many users, and users won't adopt a platform that doesn't have many apps. This is the hurdle that defeats most platforms that have tried to compete in this space. If Android app support is fully taken advantage of in the future, that alone could put the JingPad over the top. After all, access to popular Android apps will definitely fill every void in the JingOS App Store. If the JingPad had access to the greater library of Android apps, that would give everyone access to things like countless games, entertainment apps, and more. So the fact that the JingOS supports Android apps has me, well, quite excited. There's just a lot of potential there. According to the developers, Android app support is expected to be out of beta in March of 2022, which isn't even a year away, so it's promising. For now, though, there are some use cases that aren't served as well with the JingPad as I would like, and entertainment app support seems to be the biggest downside so far. There's no dedicated app for things like Netflix and Spotify, and that's a shame considering that on the website, it calls out both as supported. Now, to give the developers benefit of the doubt, I'm sure Netflix and Spotify will be working eventually, but as of the time I'm recording this video, I wasn't able to get either of those services to work. But when it comes to watching YouTube videos, that works just fine through the default browser, so at least we have that. Now, normally on most Linux desktops, you could traditionally install the latest version of Firefox, and after a few tweaks, it shouldn't have any problem watching Netflix content. But part of the problem here on JingOS is that the version of Firefox that's available via the command line is actually very out of date. And that version is so old that, well, Netflix doesn't work at all. You'll just get an error message if you try to watch Netflix through Firefox on the JingPad. I really hope they get that updated at some point in the future. The default browser, on the other hand, is Chromium, and that doesn't work with Netflix either. On my end, the lack of entertainment apps doesn't really bother me all that much. That's not really a use case for me. I have a dedicated television for streaming as well as a music player here in the studio, so my needs are met when it comes to multimedia. For my needs, things like configuring Linux servers, managing virtual machine hosts, taking notes, checking email, browsing the web, all those use cases are plenty supported on the JingPad. So I guess at the end of the day, whether or not the lack of entertainment apps is going to bother you just depends on how important that is to you. But keep in mind, that's easily something that can be improved in the future, so it may not be a problem for very much longer. So the overall question, again, is whether or not the JingPad A1 is truly a consumer-ready tablet. And my answer is yes, but with asterisks. It really depends on your use case and which apps are important to you. As of the time I'm recording this video, like I mentioned, there's really not a huge amount of apps available. Now you could sideload Ubuntu apps, and that does work for me, but some apps may not, so it's a little hit or miss. Now with Android support expected to improve in March of 2022, the JingPad actually is the best possible contender for a Linux-powered consumer-ready tablet, and it has the best possible chance of any tablet that I've seen at taking that crown. Already, for my use cases, it meets all of my use cases, so if you were to ask me personally, is it ready for prime time, I would say yes. I don't really care that Netflix isn't present, because that's not really something that I care about on a tablet at all. That might be something that you care about, but it's not something that bothers me. So when it comes to myself, I can already use the JingPad for everything that I want to use it for. I have no complaints at all. But at the end of the day, it depends on which apps you want to run. When it comes to pricing, the JingPad starts at around $699 US, so it is a bit of an investment, and it'll cost a little bit more if you add a keyboard case to it as well. So what this means is that the price for the JingPad is right in between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. So it is a premium price, but it's also a premium product, and I really like it. In my opinion, the best part of the JingPad is that we Linux users, we finally have a flagship quality product when it comes to a tablet, and that's not something that I thought we'd have until, well, several years from now. But we have that today in the JingPad. And even though the tablet is a bit on the expensive side, it might be exactly what you're looking for. If you are after a Linux-powered tablet and you want to avoid Apple and Android and Chrome OS devices, this is definitely a great pick. The JingPad is absolutely a winner in that category. Like I mentioned, whether or not it's a good fit for you depends on which apps are important to you, but I do recommend the JingPad A1. Take a look at its capabilities. If you have any questions, you can let me know in the comments down below and I'll try my best to answer them, and then you can decide for yourself if this is something that you want to explore. Now, if a particular use case that you require isn't currently being served by the JingPad, then definitely subscribe to my channel and be on the lookout for future content about the JingPad, because I do hope to do additional videos if there's any developments, especially those that increase application compatibility. So just be on the lookout on my channel for future content on the JingPad, and maybe you'll see some major developments before too long. Either way, thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you again very soon.